Hey there, everybody. Welcome back. We've got another episode of Lifestyle Medicine. Today we have Iskah Benstock. Correct?
Yes, correct.
I'm still getting used to your name switch. So yeah, I've said it twice a couple times now. So Iskah, give me a little bit of a background just for the people listening. So we've obviously talked on the phone and we've connected in the past, but give me just the background on what you're doing, where you've been, how you got into healing work, and then from there we can kind of unwind the ball.
Oof, just those little things. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally.
yeah, just those
Um,
big ones.
the reason for your life purpose.
Yeah.
Um, so I work a lot with people who are wanting to explore consciousness on an in-depth level, and to do so, um, I work with the consciousness. So I've studied a lot of subconscious healing work before. I've spent a lot of time, like my initial introduction to healing work was through hypnosis
Mm-hmm.
and hypnotherapy. And that was when I was 18. And I was never planning on being a hypnotherapist. I was never planning on being a healer. I wanted to go to art school and do graphic design and do fashion design. And I actually had my own clothing line at that point. And my life essentially exploded. It was definitely one of those experiences that I think a lot of healers and people on
Yep,
intensive spiritual paths share, right? Where
for
it's
sure.
like, I fell in love and my heart was blasted open, and then everything completely fell apart around me. So my self-image, the way I related to the entire world around me, my reputation, pretty much everything I had rested on up until that point crumbled. And at the same time, I started getting extremely energetically sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't know what that meant, nor did I have context for what was happening. But it was like in the turbulence of that, so much wisdom and knowing of why it was happening, even though I had no context and didn't know what was going on, would come to the surface. So just, levels of like soul knowing of things happening for a reason or a purpose, even though I couldn't understand them. And I got given a book on soul regression hypnotherapy. And I, at that point, didn't
Wow.
believe in past lives or anything like that. Um, was pretty sure that non-physical energies existed, but there was still like a level of, I don't really know. And I decided to go to hypnotherapy school really randomly. My parents didn't have money for art school, and I'd never received a hypnotherapy session before in my life. And I just dove in, and it was my first introduction to exploring the consciousness and the fact that, as someone who had been sent to therapy quite a bit when I was a kid, and, went through a lot of self-abusive behavior and depression and like not being understood essentially, and not understanding myself, knowing that, oh, okay, it's not just, I knew talk therapy didn't work, but the fact that we have an entire massively advanced technology inside of us called our consciousness that we can go into and manipulate, open, create new pathways in. It really inspired me at a young age, and that's how I started learning about consciousness. And so I did that for a while, and then I studied theta healing and lived with my teachers and ended up teaching theta healing, and that all works with reprogramming subconscious belief systems, and that
Yeah.
also
Can I just interject with a question there,
yeah.
just for the theta healing? Because when you had mentioned that a few years ago when I met you, you had talked about theta healing. I was totally green on the topic, know nothing about it.
Mm-hmm.
Still pretty much don't know much about it. And I'm sure there's a lot of people that are listening that probably don't either. So can you just
Yeah.
give a little segue into like what that is and how that worked a little bit? Because I know it was pivotal
Yeah.
to your work.
Yeah, it was quite pivotal. And really like had been up until not like a couple years ago, really. So theta healing essentially it's a modality that a woman named Diana Steibel brought through, and she had apparently healed herself of cancer with it. And so it's a form of, the way that they describe it is it combines metaphysics, quantum physics, and faith healing
Mm-hmm.
into like a way to reprogram the subconscious mind through the theta brainwave state. And so the premise with hypnotherapy, with the kind of work that I do right now called IST, with theta healing, with anything where you're going underneath the conscious mind and the level of the mind that we kind of sit in most of the time,
Yeah.
the theta wave is the wave. It's like the doorway to getting under the hood, basically,
Yeah.
of the consciousness. consciousness. And
Okay.
so with that, use a series of techniques to question and kind of dig into people's belief systems, which taught me a lot, because with belief systems, it's like we actually are speaking the programming that we perceive reality as all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you start to talk to people, you start to recognize like, okay, like that's how you're framing your reality. That's how you're framing your story. And Theta takes that premise and then has a way of bringing someone into a Theta state and reprogramming them through an energetic technique, where essentially what they say is they take out a belief system and then imprint a new belief system. So there's a metaphysical component to it, which for me was fascinating because it started working. I tend to be one of those people where like I'm so into esoteric, occult, metaphysics, but I am also in the space of like I'm skeptical and I want direct experience. I'm not just going to read a book about it and be like, cool, this exists, you know.
Yeah,
I have
yeah.
like this thirst for like, I want to know truth.
Yeah.
So
I hear you. Well,
yeah.
and so when you were working with people and you were doing the theta healing sessions for people, what did you see in terms of people's experience? Like, what do people, like what kind of happens? You know, like say if someone has a quote unquote like successful session, is it just a function of them having a better relationship with, if you unwind those belief systems, are they just operating more optimally in life and relationships and that kind of thing?
Yeah, when it was successful with myself and with others, it's the way that I described it was, there was more optimal, just overall life experience of relationship to your life, to reality. And my personal experience and other students that I had really resonated with this is when you're processing something all the time in your consciousness, it's really loud and noisy, right? You can imagine like if you have a really annoying fan on and it's just going and going and going, and then all of a sudden someone turns the fan off. It's not like your entire room changes. It's this little thing that was actually creating a ton of dissonance is gone. And so it's like something kind of can breathe more with the flow of reality as it is.
Yeah.
So that was one way of looking at it. Another way is just, it's kind of like you don't even realize that you're not processing the thing until way later on, when it's almost like looking in a rearview mirror going, oh yeah, I used to process that all the time. But you just don't notice because it's no longer infringing on the way that you directly connect with reality. And that's, I mean, of all the work that I do, like that is the underlying theme that I've constantly been studying, is how do we have direct connection with reality versus this kind of obscured way of interfacing with reality where we're kind of blocked off or in our own secluded bubble from connection to reality as it is.
Mm-hmm. What a lot of people, from what I've just, over the years in my healing work, people that I talk to, there's lots of different ways to access it, but I feel like when we start getting, as you said, under the hood, right? When we kind of get into the subconscious programming, belief systems, I mean, it's a pretty sticky terrain too, because people, a lot of times, right, we're all kind of living life, going through our emotions, doing our thing, sort of on autopilot for the most part. We're just,
totally.
And I think people, either just don't know, or they just haven't been exposed and they haven't, or maybe aren't even aware of the idea that there's so much of how we live our lives and the habits we have and the proclivities and the tendencies that we go towards are just all of that stuff, right? The stuff that's just running underneath, and people get stuck into these patterns and situations in life where they're like, why does the same thing keep happening? Why do I keep, attracting the same person, the same partner, the same business situation? And I think sometimes when people get that eye opener through work that you're doing, or, it could be a bunch of different things, but once they get that door open through that modality, people are like, oh my God, there's like a whole new bandwidth of life that I can play with. And that's pretty exciting for a lot of people, because they're like, totally. Yeah. They just weren't hip to it.
Definitely.
They just didn't know. Separate, but when I was in school, I tinkered with the idea of being a psychology major for a bit. I ended up becoming an art major, didn't do it. But I remember just getting into Jungian psychology and reading about, the collective unconscious and the shadow. Jung was just huge into these these impulses and the things that we carry that are quote unquote dark, but that are a part of us, have to be integrated, and they will, run amok essentially if you're not careful
Totally.
and you don't pay attention to life and your rhythms. It's pretty fascinating stuff. All that stuff is, I love hearing about that kind of stuff because it's real. People have, and we all have to navigate it whether we know it or not. And I think, it can be problematic or very wonderful depending on how you go about it. And if you find a good practitioner, someone who you trust and who you vibe with. So you had said that, when we talked yesterday and then you've said now that up till a couple of years ago, that was sort of the direction that you were still in, and you were seeing a lot of people, and then you've shifted gears a little bit now and you're not as focused on that. So talk to me about that. What's happening now? What's different?
So many things are different. I think that it was a collection of things that changed. One of them was that with the way that and this is not me trying to talk bad about the Theta Healing community or anything like that. I just wanted a deeper level of education and wanted a deeper level of training. And whenever you're using and I didn't know this until a couple of years ago, but anytime you're using a level of an energetic technique and you're using it over and over again, it's a muscle, and there's ways to do energy work, and there's ways to get into people's unconscious that are healthy. And then there's ways where you can pull, it's almost like you can pull a muscle, you can deplete yourself from using your energy over and over again to do healings on people. And so one of the things was I could not find someone that could specifically tell me like scientifically almost, like what I'm doing with my body of energy when I was working on people. So that was one thing, because I had so many clients and I was teaching classes quite a bit that I could tell somewhere I was pulling on my vital energy. And I could also, I had premonitions, you look at some people that do a lot of channeling and energy work, like far down the road, and a lot of them look really beat up. And I personally think it's because there's this essential energy that you're not supposed to use in your healing work. That's for you as the being that's doing that. And I didn't want to hurt myself. So that was the first thing, which led me to recognizing it's like to actually have someone tell you this is specifically what you're doing with your energy takes a very precise form of vision. And most of the time you get into metaphysical work and things are very vague. Like people just give you kind of vague, broad answers of what might be going on. And none of that really helped me. And again, like as a seeker that wants truth, I don't like vague. I want like specific, precise, exact experience. So my experience with the Theta Healing work is it can get you to a certain level, but I think maybe because her mission was not to move it past what she did, like she unpacked the basics of belief work, she unpacked the basics of like touching trauma, like where traumas start, and that was it. And then she's spreading it worldwide through Hay House and all of this. Yep. But I like I said, I wanted more training. Yep. So there was a mixture of things happening there. And then also it was like, it was through, I also did a ton of work with entheogenic plant medicines from South America, and using theta while doing that. So like I was like, how do I get to the source of the source of the source? Like the core places where this stuff is stemming from, at like the basis of, whatever, my DNA, my cellular structure, wherever these things come from at their core, which are different depending on what you're looking at. Yeah. And all tend to come back to the fact that there's just this wound of human separation, and it plays out through us in different ways. And so I was thirsty, and I couldn't find, there were certain things where like things would get better, but there were certain things that I still didn't have answers for. And so it was around that time where I knew that I needed to learn more about subtle energies, how to see them, how to work with them. And I knew there was something else. And I had a really interesting experience where for a week straight I had dreams that I was in Maui. And I was in the dreams, I was saying, oh, it's so good that I followed those dreams and went to Maui. That was really smart of me to follow those dreams and go to Maui. And then I'd wake like 5 days in a row that happened. So It wasn't like, let's decode this. It was like, okay, yeah, heard. I'll get my butt to Maui when I can.
Yeah.
And I met someone there who actually found me, and they showed me my energetic healing school.
Ah, very cool.
So, which segued into this, an incredible form of trauma healing work and consciousness exploration work there called IST, which stands for Inner Space Technique. And it has gotten me to places and to the core of things like nothing else I've studied has. And that's coming from like 9 years of just searching and finding and like hardcore studying, working with thousands of people, like a lot of work. So yeah, I'm impressed with it.
Yeah, to say the least. I always find that kind of stuff is interesting too, because I think as we go through life in general, we have, we have stages and ages, and we seem to have these evolutions. We stay with something for a period of time, and then we usually, shift gears and we move forward into something new, something that is, and it's sort of like everything that you've done before it's been like a prerequisite training, right? It's sort of gotten,
that's how it feels.
Yeah. And it's like, my mom has always said, she's like, yeah, great. It's like, kind of like lily pads, a frog jumping from one to one. Like you stay in one spot for a while, you soak up the view, you do your thing, but then you got to leap at some point to the next iteration of whatever you're doing, right? Whatever your, the growth is. So now that you've shifted gears into this, how is that changing your work? What are you doing? Yeah. Like how is it different now? What's it look like now in real time? Like what's kind of happening with this work?
There's a lot. Well, one of the main things that I'm actually really consistently blown away by and impressed with is because I've been studying like a big part of the school, it's called clairvision. And so a big part of the school is cultivating very clear, precise, energetic vision, which is one of the things I was looking for. And so the level of piercing through vagueness and targeting things so laser specific that are happening in people just by virtue. And they talk about this actually in, when they talk about vision practices more in like Vedic traditions, there's like by virtue of seeing things change. So like just when something is directly seen in presence, which is really the concept of darshan, like when these masters come and they just see you and people have these epic experiences of enlightenment. I think that's like the ultimate version of it. But to have a certain level of energetic vision and precision to lock in on what's going on with someone, the acceleration that just that is having with my clients, where I can just directly pierce through their story, the traumas, everything that's going on the surface, into connection with their essence, and then speak directly to that. It's like so much of the belief work stuff just falls by the wayside because they're getting a direct experience of someone seeing them. So that's a big part of it. Another part of it is the changes in my clientele, which is very interesting. Like I'm going from people that, and I love everyone I've worked with dearly, and I have a lot of really amazing relationships with my past clients and students. But one of the things that's happening for me a lot more is people who are really seeking self-knowledge and truth are the people that I'm working with. And that's different than people that just want to be fixed so that life's a little bit better and more enjoyable. Sure. It's not that you don't get life being better and enjoyable by following the pursuit of self-knowledge, but it is that these people that are wanting to work with me have will towards wanting something bigger and something more. And so as a practitioner, that's so satisfying for me, because I can give that. And the space of the technique that I use really has this massive capacity to reconnect people with these huge parts of themselves. So it's different. It's different than working with like baseline issues, although those are part of it. There's this broader, more cosmological aspect that can happen through it as well. Which is funny to say because some of the people that I work with, they're not these super cosmic, they're like they people that have, they own businesses and they're not super like out there or woo, but they
Yeah.
have this wanting for something more. And that's really all it takes, is an authentic, sincere wanting for something more. And I think that's changed my experience a lot too as a practitioner, and the work that I do and what I've always really wanted, but hadn't really had a context to understand, like, that's what I was wanting to give. Like, I didn't have the words, didn't have the framework.
Right.
So.
Well, in a similar fashion, when I was in school for acupuncture and people would come, that was kind of while I was in school, that was one of the threads that was, I don't want to say it was difficult for me, but if you're seeing a person, right, maybe once a week or once every 2 weeks, or sometimes more if they have some chronic thing. But there were a lot of times, right, the attitude of the person was, put the fire out, put this, like come in here and take care of this thing. And if it's an injury, like a physical injury, like they've banged their knee, that's a very different kind of thing than, I have this chronic emotional pattern in my life that I'd like you to push the button for me and stick the needles in and make it go away, Yeah. And that was a very difficult place to be in. And it became tiring over time, where I think, the direction of my business, which became lifestyle education, was around that sort of issue. I thought, there's only so much you can do with putting out fires for people. At some point, I think you have to orient your clientele, the people that you're working with, that it's like, there's work here. You have to, you have to work on this as if it were a sculpture or anything else. You're going to have to tend to it or water it like a plant. There's a very proactive sort of thing. And I think that was, so I can relate to you when you say that. I think, it's like, God, to get the right people that actually want to evolve and grow their life and their experience in life. That's a wonderful clientele to come across when you do. And people sometimes don't even know that they want to do that yet. Sometimes you have to tend to them just to like, this is an option, if you want to go down this road and shift some things in your life for better experience, right? More dynamic living.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a big part of our job as practitioners too. I mean, and we have to even convey that to someone, you have to realize it on your own path, right? Like, especially if you're born in North America, where it's the fixomania thing it's pretty huge. And that's kind of the way that we're trained. And it's not, versus like traditional Chinese medicine. It's all about prevention from the start, and keeping that essence that we have innately from birth. And so there is I totally agree with that. Like, I think that it's part of our responsibility as practitioners, but also as educators as bridges to be like, look, evolution, active evolution. First of all, I've been on this kick recently where, like, embodiment sounds like a arrival point, but really, to me, embodiment is a whole journey. It's active, and evolution is an active principle, and you have to have that framework to approach life in a way where you're going to really be able to integrate these things and change and become something new. And instead of that feeling like a chore or something you have to do, you learn to embrace it as a journey, as an experience. And it's totally going to be challenging. It's definitely going to take will. You're definitely going to have to find will in places you didn't know you had it, which is part of evolution. So, it's meaty, it's definitely not for the faint of heart. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's life worth living,
Yeah. Right. And it always brings me back to one of my favorite sayings, which is, heroes aren't born, they're made. And you have to, if your story is going to have and I don't mean just, the archetypal hero, but I mean, just to process your shit, you're going to have to also go into, like you said, some pretty dark places. And I think that's the nice thing about, I think, working with people and getting them to see that. I think there's the two things that I like are, like, when people actually realize that's a possibility. They're like, wow, life can be better if I put some work into changing some things. That's a wonderful thing to see people open up to. And then if people are already on board with that idea, to facilitate it and just go down that road, right? Both of those things are like, great, totally. Wonderful. I'm happy to jump on board on either one of those if they
Yeah,
can.
exactly.
Let me ask you this, because this is curious. I ask people this, and Chinese medicine, I would say, because it's old, and Ayurveda, right? There's this, some of the ancient medicine, the older medicine traditions are seen as, I don't know, by the West, right? Sort of old fashioned. They're ancient. And sometimes they're seen as like new age woo woo. And then there's a completely different movement of what we would call, I don't know, like the westernized new age movement, which is, it's different, but one is seen as kind of like old archaic, one is seen as new age. And the terminology and the languaging in these worlds is like Chinese medicine has its own language. First, I mean, of course, it's in Chinese, but I mean, they have, the way they talk about the elements, the way they talk about, all of these things that happen to you and these syndromes and these metaphors, right, for how things attack the body and how you have to process them, and heat, damp, cold, dryness, these things that it can invade from the external world. So they have their own languaging. And then, in the New Age Western movement, there's a whole languaging that goes with that stuff too. And so my question to you is, I've had to figure out, being in the West, part of me was like, yes, I want to work with people who are like on board with this stuff to a degree. And then I also want to open up doors for people that are very just westernized, regular folks. How do you make it digestible? How do you make it accessible? Because I saw that was one of the biggest hitches when, like in Chinese medicine school, right? Someone comes in and some new grad student who's just got all this cool theory and all this cool, amazing stuff. And they're like, well, Roger, let me tell you about, the divisions of yin and yang. And I'm like, you could just watch the patients just glaze over,
blink.
They're stoked to be sharing the information. You can tell they're passionate, but the patient is just like, the information is just hitting them in the forehead and falling down. And I remember thinking like, okay, so there's got to be a way to do this, right? To make it accessible. So in your work, have you had to do that? Have you had to learn to make this type of accessible to your clientele, or have you kind of steered away from that and just like, I want to work with people who are just on board and who are totally like bought in? Like, what's that been like?
I'm still, I'm totally still actively in the process of that. It's a great question because I think to be the only way that you're going to get really deeply into any of this stuff is you're going to be that person that's enthusiastic about the theory and can, look at these, especially like something like Chinese medicine, like these broad, poetic, abstract ways of perceiving things that when you actually click into the know-how that's there, like when you click into that languaging and that flow, it does make sense. But it takes a level of sitting with it, studying it, like being completely infused by it to actually get to that point. And the people that are coming to you most likely aren't going to do that. That's why they're coming to you and not doing it on themselves or with their other buddies that are also studying it. So to be honest, it took me a long time to even come to terms with the fact that I had to get grounded with my languaging. And I think teaching really helped me with that, because one of the things that I experienced on my lily pad of teaching Theta was that I had to start articulating these things that to me were so obvious in people's thought streams, patterns, subconscious experiences. And then my students would see me make these huge energetic shifts on people and not understand what I'm doing energetically. So, I had to articulate these things that are, they're very hard to articulate. So that was a good training ground for that for me. Because you can't use all of these ethereal words. Like it just doesn't really pass the space of techniques or what they're doing. So that's been a big one. I think also there is definitely a level of coming back down to the human connection, because all of these things go so far beyond what we perceive as human. I mean, really, they are human. Really, at our truest essence, we are these incredible, way out there creatures. And yet at the same time, there's this very real deal. Like, I live in the world. I feel very deeply. I have challenging experiences in life. I have challenging experiences with my partner or my family, or I just feel really deep pain, or I feel pleasure, or I feel I do these things that I have shame about because I'm not supposed to, or,
Right.
I hide these parts of myself because they're not okay. And so it's a lot of that is how I come at it, which is, I feel like we've been, first of all, shame is insanely oppressive, and we inflict that kind of oppression on ourselves so much when we're buying into all of these thoughts of like even like the basics of sexuality and sexual desire, or things that we think that we do that are wrong or bad, and then we criminalize ourselves internally for them and then hide them away and create whole personality structures to protect ourselves.
It's very
when
true.
really, like, you have someone else sit with you and you go, oh, wow, cool, that's not really a big deal. But I totally hear that that's a big deal for you, and I totally feel where that's coming from and how vulnerable you have to be to share something that's you're very ashamed of. But to have someone just fully embrace and accept you in those places and in those moments, like, it is very, 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 very hard to phase me with like anything that people have done or said or experienced in their life. And so that's when I say like human connection, bringing it back down to vulnerability, bringing it back down to basic connectivity and intimacy, that's really helped. And the fact that we are really all going through similar versions of the same thing. And so when I can connect to people on those levels, and it can also really come back to like, are you taking care of yourself? Like
the basics.
Sleeping well? Are you eating well? How are you talking to yourself? How are you identifying yourself and your thought patterns? Like, and then from there, from all of those things, which is really just basic connection with people, and how they're feeling and what they want to feel. And I think from there, people feel really safe with me. Like, and I wouldn't be surprised if you're one of those people too, where people just tell you like, I never tell anyone this, but like for some reason, there's something about you.
My whole life.
Yeah, exactly.
From the time I was little,
and I can feel that with you. Like, you feel very safe. You know, you feel like someone where I would be like, yes, totally. Here's my deepest, darkest, and you're still going to love me.
Yes, totally. For sure. Yeah. No, it's good. You're perceptive, because it's been like that most of my life. And I think going into this field, and that's why I asked you that question, is when I wanted to go into Chinese medicine school, first of all, I stumbled into Chinese medicine school, fell ass backwards into it, didn't go to Santa Cruz to go there. At the time, I had followed a girl I was in love with to Santa Cruz, went to a Kung Fu class, found out they were all acupuncturists. And I'm like, wait. So you guys do Kung Fu and like heal people? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, all right, so I'm quitting my job and I'm going to do that because that sounds awesome.
Totally.
And I get to school and people are like, yeah, I've been, people had like moved there for that. And I was like, so you guys all planned this? And they were like, that was pretty much everybody. So I think when I stumbled into this stuff, I found Chinese medicine. And then that was one of the first things that sort of came up though, when I was like, this is, first of all, if you can, I've always had a little bit of a metaphysic bent. I've always been interested in that kind of stuff. So I think when I started reading it, I was already there was a buy-in factor I already had. And it was beautiful, elegant, also esoteric, especially if you got into classical Chinese medicine. And then I was confronted with this reality. I remember thinking like, okay, so this stuff is awesome. And I can see after 4 or 5 years of being in school what has worked. The theory is sound. It's very applicable. But I was confronted with this. How am I going to make this digestible for the truck driver, for the plumber, for like the everyday person, without them just being like, oh, here we go with some woo-woo stuff that they just cannot understand. Not because it doesn't work, just because the languaging wasn't, like you said, right? Just the human, where that person is like, how do you translate it in a way that's accessible for them? And that's been an ongoing evolution for me, especially moving to Sacramento. Sacramento is the capital. It's a government town. There's definitely a liberal thread here, but there's a lot of conservative people, and I've had to just do that. And it, the funny thing was, I had my mom. She said this to me. She goes, "Gray," she's like, your lifelong hero is Superman. She's like, now think about that. She's like, that's the message right there. She's like, Superman is a mild-mannered, nerdy, everyday person working at like as a reporter. She's like, but he's sitting on like a winning lottery ticket. He can throw cars. He can travel into space. He's bulletproof. He's got all these crazy things, and he comes from a completely different place, but he's got the mild-mannered thing. And she's like, you kind of have to do that with Americans a little bit if you're going to want this to like grab. And I was like, oh, mom wisdom, just so.
I want to meet your mom.
Yeah, it was like,
amazing.
I was like, rock on, Mom. Like, cause and she was right. And I was thinking the same thing, but she put it into terms where I thought that's a really important point to kind of, to sit with, and then she told me that. And then right at the end of school, there's that saying from Taoism, the moment you say it's the Tao, it's no longer the Tao. Like the moment you say it's this thing, you've kind of lost it a little bit. And I kept thinking, I was like, I don't really have to tell people explicitly the theory that I'm, I don't have to like tell them and wax intellectual on it. I don't have to go really deep into these things and wow them with the glitz of the theory. Even though as beautiful as it is, I thought I just have to kind of do it and talk about it in other terms. And then people start to have, and that's where I've seen, which is kind of fun too. It's kind of like an exercise, like, how do you take something that's totally esoteric that is just out there and you're like, here's a little morsel for you to eat, like eat that. Tastes pretty good, doesn't it? And you don't know what's in it, but just, have a bite of this. And that's been, but I asked you that because I've just seen people, I think if they're working in any field where it's a little outside or a lot outside the mainstream narrative and culture of just how we operate in the West, it's a real struggle. People, and I've seen people really like spiral where they're so talented, they're so passionate, they've had really good result in their life, right, and with their clients, but they can't bring it down, like you said, to like the human connection, relatable thing. And that's a problem sometimes. I'm like, damn it, that's a bummer, because if you're good at what you're doing and you've had therapeutic effect, it's like we have to work on that, if you want to continue to send your goodness into the world. And that's kind of frustrating, I think that's like for a lot of people, especially people that are artists and that are creative types. They're like, what do you mean I have to like, funnel my shit together in and make it digestible for people? I'm like, I know it's a bitter truth, but it's like,
totally.
But it's kind of the way it goes,
Yeah, I totally, and I resisted it for a long time. I mean, and a
lot of people
because you want the world to be interested and be invested in this kind of thing. And then I think you realize, like, I mean, one of the ways I look at it is that back when we had proper temples and initiates and people studying the kinds of things we're studying, it wasn't everyone. It was a small percentage of people that 100%. Were that dedicated to their craft. And they definitely didn't go around telling everyone what they were doing. They didn't need to. And I think that there's something that's quite beautiful about being a bit of a shapeshifter where you, like a big part of my process with this has been that kind of, I would say what you're talking about is the maturation, in a sense of, you look at the character that you're playing in life and how can I relate, how can I be in the world and not of it? Like, how can I really, really be here and be present with where everyone is at, relate there, and yet hold something where people are like, I don't know what it is about you, but
that's exactly
I want to know you. And you have something, and they might not know it the whole time, but it's like, I think that part's beautiful too, where you can't compartmentalize humans no matter what. Like, they may be working some extremely corporate high-level job and have this, all of the reasons why the new age scene or something like alternative would be like, oh, this person's asleep. And yet, like, they have this sixth sense inside of them that just comes out and is like, I don't know what it is, but like, I want to know you.
Yep.
Or, there's this human intuition thing. Doesn't matter how much sleep or moha or whatever you want to call it is clouding someone.
Right.
We have something built in that can really feel light recognition or whatever you want to call it. Knowing.
Right. And you could put, like, that's the thing, right? And that's the crazy thing about language and thought is you can attach any title to something, and that title can trigger some people, totally open people. It can be, whatever it is, but you're right. Because I think, and you just nailed it on the head for me in terms of, I think when we're going through life and we're navigating our healing and we're trying to evolve and we're trying to get our life back in order so that we can live it well.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're trying to work through all of that stuff. And at some point I kind of realized, I'm 37 now, and I somewhere, I think in maybe my little after 30, I got to this point where I thought, it's a decision how I kind of paint my character, this character who is, ultimately kind of just a construct, right? I thought, how I want to paint it is I want to be that guy, I want to be that person where I can sit on my ticket and I don't have to show it. And I can,
well said.
Yeah, I don't have to hey, look at my numbers.
Yeah.
It was more of, I actually enjoyed the process of being the Clark Kent. I thought I want to be able to bump elbows and drip out whatever I've got on the inside without overtly telling people. Like, it, to me, fundamentally, like that character, if it was a movie, I thought I like that character. That's interesting. It's creative. It's a challenge too, which I always dig. I like a good challenge. And it makes things pretty interesting, and what I've seen is just in my own personal experience with that is becoming that character and trying to be that way and navigate where I say less, do more in action, and have like you said, there's like that. So what's his story? Like, the person's got an interesting thing going on, but I can't really pinpoint it. Yeah. That's more fun, at least for me.
It's totally fun.
It's fun.
Right?
It's like, that's what it boils down to. It's just more fun. I thought, yeah, that's something I can get behind. And what I found is just, in terms of the realities of 3D business, it's helpful. It's
totally helpful.
It's very helpful. And like you said, I resisted it too for a long time. Like when MySpace was still a thing and I went back, I remember when I first got into MySpace in my early 20s, and my page was like chakras and just crazy, like everything, every new age color, with crystals. And I remember just thinking, and I remember how many people were just so turned off by it. We're so just like, okay, so Gray's gone off the deep end, and like I can't talk to him anymore. Totally. It's like, and people assumed, then I remember thinking that kind of stuff. It was when I came home to visit, like the narrative, people were like, well, I can't talk to you about this because you believe that. I remember like, what? Like what? And I realized it was just part of the package because people don't get it or they didn't understand. So like you said, definitely an evolution. Like how do we go through and navigate this stuff in a way? And I think it's a relevant question for a lot of people in what you would call esoteric or outside the box field. It's like, it's a question you should sit with. You don't have to do anything. There's no like rule where I would say everyone should do it this way. Not at all. Like, people are going to stay fully in their languaging. I think it's just a good question to explore because it's relevant nowadays.
Totally. Yeah. And it totally depends also on like what your intention is too. I think that's one thing that grounds me a lot is in that space of taking on the character and learning how to interface with the world. And I love sitting on my ticket. I love that phrasing. Yeah. There's also this want in me, like in that human connectivity, in that very basic, like heart to heart, me to you space of creating connection beyond these feelings of being separate and making it okay to just be a regular freaking human when everyone's trying, not everyone, but most people are just trying to be a version of something that we're actually not, which is extremely taxing. When I become more relatable to people, I change people, or I catalyze change more, versus like when I'm fighting some kind of fight and you look back and it's like, who am I fighting against with all of these chakra, rainbow, laser beam, intergalactic?
What am I doing? Right.
Yeah. Do I know what I'm doing right now? No, not really.
Yeah.
But I was very justified in it, somewhere, which is always kind of a thing. If I'm really justified in something, I'm a little bit questioning of it now.
Yeah. But, right.
But yeah, it's like that relatability, I feel like is there's such a transmission that can happen.
Yeah.
And that, whatever that is so beautiful to me, where someone that can have such a quote unquote normal life can experience something just from your presence, just from the way that you are, that touches them really deeply and touches a part of them that resonates with that. Mm-hmm. And that's magic to me.
Oh, for sure.
And if I can definitely do that a lot more now than when I had super dreadlocked hair, wanted to tattoo my face.
For sure.
Like, was wearing every rainbow fractal that I could,
Of course.
talking about Arcturians. Like,
right.
talk about like the least relatable person.
Well, it's right. And there's going to be like, there's going to be a whole grouping of people that totally gravitate to you because of the uniform you're wearing. Right. There's going to be a lot of people who are like, oh my God, you're one of me. Great. And that has its place. Absolutely. I think it's just, yeah, you get what I'm saying. We're speaking the same language. It's just, it's like, okay, so how do I become more relatable? How do I make this? And like I said, I've had people in the past, only in recent years, people assume if they meet me for the first time, they're like, oh, you probably have a sales job. You're probably like a real estate person or something. And I'm like, that's great. I'm like, yeah, cool. So glad that you're so far off. Like, that's just makes me feel good about whatever the hell I'm doing. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. And so I think it's really good. To have this conversation. So this kind of segues into the thing that I wanted to ask you, which was, I don't know how long it was ago. And when we started the interview and I had that moment of pause, I'm like, I was about to say Iskah Avaya. And I was like, whoa, no, like rewire. I was like, go back. Cause we had talked about this, but it got me for a second. So, Iskah Benstock, and the name change. And this is more of a curiosity, not a judgment. It's like about this larger issue. But a lot of people you and I know, people that I've met that don't know you and me mutually, but the name change, right? In the new ager scene, I would call, people will change their given name and take on a quote unquote spiritual name. And usually it's not changed legally even. They've just taken on the name, which is fine. Like, I don't care at all, but it happens quite a bit where people will take on these very like divine natured names as a means to sort of, I don't know, claim a spiritual identity or what they're aiming towards. And then when you switched back and you went back to your given last name, Benstock, I reached out to you and I remember saying, I was like, I really appreciate that you went just like back to your birth last name, Benstock. I thought that's so awesome. And we kind of had that, I don't know, Facebook Messenger about it. And we got into a little conversation and it was just something, me being a fly on a wall in this community where I'm sort of trying to, in a sense, be the Clark Kent and hide hide the stuff I'm sitting on. Talk to me about that, like why you changed it back, I guess, maybe even both, like why the change, to the spiritualized name and then back. Yeah, talk to me about that process and what you've seen and just your commentary on that whole dynamic. Curious. Yeah,
it's so interesting. It's funny because I changed it and it was like very little people said anything about it. And no one until the point where you asked me said anything about it directly.
Yeah.
So it was really cool for me to experience the first direct signal is like someone that actually like you were seeing and I could feel it in our exchange.
Yep.
The like essence of why I changed it back. And so to start, I changed. So my birth name is Iskah Benstock. And the first time I changed it, and I went by Jessie most of my life. So my parents still call me Jessie.
Yeah.
I have friends that still call me Jessie, but at first I changed it to Jessie Avaya. And that was when that whole thing happened to me when I was 18. And essentially it was because the first spirit guide reading, the woman was trying to give me a healing and she said that my spirit guides wouldn't let her spirit guides heal me because I was a healer and I was supposed to heal myself, which I was like in pieces. So for me to hear that at the time, I was like, I don't even know what you do, but no one can help me. And I thought you could, and now you can't help me because my invisible crew is telling your invisible crew that I'm a healer and I want to go to art school. So
right. You're like, you're like, sense. What? You just fed me a shit sandwich when like, I thought you were going to help me out here. Right.
Yeah, exactly. I thought you were going to be my saving grace.
Right.
She was the woman that gave me the book on hypnotherapy. So she did send me off well. And I love her so much. She's amazing. But she said that she had heard the word Avaya and that it was an energy that I was a part of like my higher self that I was incarnating. And so at the time I was like, Avaya, that sounds cool. So I was like, well, I'm just going to put that as my Facebook name. Jessie Avaya. Sounds good.
Yeah.
And then a couple of years later, I looked it up, and in Sanskrit, Avaya means to arrive or to inform or to come into form. And I was like, well, that's cool. Like, I feel like I'm arriving. I feel like I'm starting to come into form a little bit.
I can get behind that, right?
With that.
Yeah, seems good enough.
There was this, like, super deep, I mean, it was at a really pivotal time, and it sounded cool, and it had a cool ancient word name to it, so I just kind of went with that. And then I changed my name to Iskah because when I was around 24, I had a significant, I mean, this is after doing a ton of healing work, super deep dive, completely, like, I just had a lot of that kind of ancient soul wisdom, or whatever you want to call it, like this knowing inside of me, maturing, really coming online. I felt completely different, but I didn't want to change my name to like unicorn moonbeam fairy, you know, like I just like, I don't want to be called Jessie anymore. And Jessica reminds me of when my mom's mad at me. So what do I do? And I ended up just, it's like, well, where's my name from? And I looked it up, and it's the Hebrew origin of the name Jessica is Iskah. And it means to, long form, it means to perceive a divinely inspired future. And that's with a special, like, this thing called a yud, which is a flame character. It was what they would refer to a prophet. There's a prophetess in the Torah named Sarah, and when she would go into these spaces, they would call her Iskah. But on a short form level, it means to behold or to gaze upon. And I love the word behold, because to me, it's like when you can behold the essence of something, then things change, like presence happens. And then when I put those two together at the time, it's like to bring the vision of a divinely inspired future into form, or like, you know, I put Iskah and Avaya together, and I was like, this is perfect.
Yeah. I'm going to do this, right?
It sounds beautiful, Iskah Avaya. Yeah. And I went with it for a long time. And then it got to the point where right when I stopped doing Theta and started going to my school, I started to see that when my life fell apart when I was 18, all I had, like, I literally only had the foundation of my spiritual path to build my sense of self-identity on. And so the Avaya piece was really that, like, it was really being like, this is what I identify with. This is who I am. This is all I have. And so it was a great way. Like, I don't see it as a bad thing. I see it as like a stage where my little ego was like, okay, like, give me something, like some kind of ground to recreate myself on.
Fair enough.
And it was part of that. But I also started to see the character that I had played, and how much my spiritual character isn't actually me. She's very functional. She's very into spirituality. She studies a ton about all sorts of spiritual worlds. But I felt very unintegrated with the rest of the world, and that had always been a challenge, like we were just talking about. And then I also just started to see, it went pretty hand in hand with starting to see through the New Age scene and being like, oh, shoot. Like this whole vision that I full on bought into it. Like, I didn't have discernment. I just, this visionary part of me that wants this utopian world, full, like 100% bought in, and was like, we're doing it. Like, this is how we create the new world, you know? And when that vision started crumbling, it was like the character that I played in that story started to be more exposed to me. And I didn't want that to infringe on my clarity. And there was something about just taking on the name, like taking back my original last name, where it felt like a reclamation of who I am without having to prove who I am to anyone, without having to be this very shiny, sparkly, like putting an avatar in front of myself, going like, this is who I am. Because I came to a point where I was like, I could call myself Fred. It doesn't matter. Like, what I do is why people are drawn to me. What I do, what I connect to, what I bring to the world has nothing to do with my identity. And it's, on a certain level, I've had questions, because Iskah Avaya sounds really cool, looks really good on paper. Iskah Benstock is a little more clunky, you know, and something about Benstock where it's just like, oh,
It's got
like,
some, well, it has some, I think that one of the things I said to you was, you know, my mom's an English major. My dad was a, you know, journalism major. There's a lot of writing and languaging in my family. And so sounds, tones, cadence, alliteration, words. I mean, I love writing. And so for me, tones matter, you know, and when you said Iskah Benstock, I was like, it has some grit and weight and it kind of, it's like punctuates, you know, it has this like, boom, like, and I was like, good for you for going back to that. You know, and I was so curious about that, but it does, it has a little bit more like stops, it clicks, you know, and I thought, good, you know, that's great that you did it, and you were open as hell about it. Like when I asked you, I thought maybe she'll be offended, but I'm gonna risk it. Like I'm just so I was so genuinely curious, and that kind of that's the reason I'm asking is, like I said, you know, I always want to preface this by saying, you know, I do my best. Am I guilty of it? Yes. Like, do I judge people sometimes? For sure. But I'm trying to say that I'm not coming from a judgmental place. It was me asking because, I would just say, you know, I've seen in what I would call the new age community, definitely just seen some bullshit, you know, and you're like, there's all of this, there's so much fluff about, you know, it's kind of like, here's the high vibration, new age, like principles that people are obviously so not living. Like, you know, you meet them, you know, or you see their business plan, or you meet someone who knows them and they're like, this person's fucking this person over fully. Like, you know, they're just not in integrity in what they're doing. So that can happen in the new age scene, and that can happen in regular Western culture, right? That's nothing new. It's been happening since the dawn of time, I think. But when there's the, you know, it's the I guess the sometimes the posturing that can come with it, or the claim that I've got to have a spiritual name to really show you who I am. I think there was this pitfall I started to see. I was like, God, if that happens, not always, right? But if it happens, there's almost there's a real ego pitfall that you're putting yourself. Huge. That's like, it can really happen. Where I thought, if you change your name. Because it's spiritual, oh man, there's definitely a slippery slope that you get on that can be, it can be wonderful, it can be great, but I've just seen it where it's not, and I thought, wow, that can really bite you in the ass if you're not careful. You know, that can that can come back. Totally. And the piece to that is also, you know, when you look at olden traditions, you know, all of the like sacred languages, you know, Chinese is one. There's, you know, Aramaic. You know, Sanskrit, these tonal languages too. One of the common threads amongst all of them, they said, look, the tones that a person identifies you by are really important. And when they're given to you, you know, some people like really don't like their names, and I'm like, yeah, change it. But they're like, it has weight. Just, you know, your name as it is when it's been given to you coming into the world, there's something special about that too. And, you know, my middle name is Christ. My mom, it's spelled Christ. My birth name, my mom's maiden name is Christ, but it's pronounced Christ, and it's like it actually has German ties. It's a long story. I don't want to go too deep into it, but my full name, you know, Grayson Christ or Christ Estrada, you know, I had that. I had my full name for a while on social media, and people started thinking that I was like adding a spiritual name, you know, like and
oh, interesting.
Yeah, and I remember being like, God, that's so funny, because I could see it's like, if you're going to claim a spiritual name, that's one of the big dogs, you know, like that's definitely one of the big ones. Like, if I'm going to go big or go home, you know, like, let's not call it, let's cut the shit. I'm just going to go for Christ.
And you don't see men doing that often, right? You see women taking on Magdalene or Magdalena, but for a man to just claim Christ.
Yeah, like, I'm just going to take Christ, right? And so I remember there was this point, and this was years back, like it was while I was in Chinese medicine school, but I remember just being like, the irony, you know, like, that's actually really my name. But again, it was like, and I'm not ashamed of my name. I love my name, Grayson Christ or Christ Estrada. Like, it's a cool name. But I remember thinking, like, I'm just going to take it down. Like, I also don't want to be where things are right now. I don't want to be slung into that culture, you know. I thought, I can sit on that ticket. That's fine. You know, I'll totally just sit back. And right when I was deciding to do this, I remember I was like, should I just take it down? I was like, no, fuck that. I'm going to keep my name because it's me. But I don't, I was like wrestling with this, and I go to this bar, and sometimes, the universe just kind of like talks to you, because I'm really like in my head overly heated about it. Like, what should I do? Like, should I take my social media name down and, simplify it? And I remember this bartender, I give him my debit card, I get a drink, and the guy looks at it, and he double takes, and he's like, you don't look like Christ. And he puts it down, and I just start to laugh, I'm just like, and I'm like, okay, that was like my green light to like, just take it down, Gray. You don't look like Christ.
That's
like
great.
It was so funny. And so I took it down, but this naming thing has been like on my mind for quite a while, just in this scene, just in people, it's interesting, it's a very interesting thing to do. So when we opened this conversation a while back, and I was asking you about that, and you were like, I went back to Benstock. So can you flush out kind of what you've seen, like, I guess in other people, in other situations that kind of brought you to the decision to go back to your birth name?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I saw personally was, and this is really fascinating to me, that I think we do this all the time to live in the world and to survive in the world, where we will create personas and characters that are very functional.
Yep.
And the fact that I had created a subsection of myself, literally that had only certain parts of my personality in it, only certain parts of my expressions in it. I'm someone who, like, I listen to metal music, I listen to punk rock music. Like, I was like total goth kid when, and into metal. Like, I was a crazy rampant child.
Yeah.
And also went like full on into the festival scene and the rave scene. Like, and this like amalgamation of all different parts, like intense forces that are super dark or heavy, or and like really, really devotional, light, refined parts of my spiritual self and essence. And so, I felt like, first of all, there were parts of me that I had felt for years I didn't know how to express, I had cut off from, I felt weren't allowed. Even though I was super into being vulnerable, it was like there were just parts of me. It was really odd. Okay, so let me see if I can flesh this part down. The experience of, first of all, I created a character.
Yep.
Stepped into that character, became a living embodiment of it.
Right.
Certain parts of me could come through it. Certain parts of me unconsciously couldn't, because it didn't exist in that paradigm. That character became very functional in the world, took over my life. Like, I was co-facilitating ritual ceremonies and healing work and teaching classes. It was my business. It was who I was known as socially. My social media grew. So on top of just my experience of Iskah via, there was everyone else's continued reflection of the character that just crystallized something more.
Yeah.
And I don't even totally understand how that works, but I think it's quite fascinating.
Yeah.
Because so much of what our environment reflects to us, we can unconsciously take on, and you see that from early childhood development, right?
Fully.
And so it was almost like seeing a certain level of that happening and being like, whoa, wait, like, I'm not this one crystallized subsection of myself. Right. And I also had people that, I love parts of my school where, like, the people that came into my life that showed me my school, like, they're like, we want your intensity. We want the parts of you that, like, are violent and are intense and have this intense amount of will that wasn't able to get channeled because people didn't understand it. Like, I started to be seen in this way by people. Obviously, they had trained in precise energetic vision for years, so they saw right through the character.
Yeah.
So just by virtue of being around them, I started feeling like, oh wait, that's not me. And then I started realizing, oh wow, I've only identified with this very small portion of myself, and I don't even know how much of that portion of myself is based on me or based on constructs of what I think I have to be. or places that I've built an identity, like I said, to rest on so that I felt okay in the world after my old identity had been smashed.
Yep.
So just all of that that's internally what was going on. It was so much more beyond like, should I be Iskah or not? It was like, oh my God, like I've been operating in this tiny part. And then to answer the second part of your question, what I've noticed with other people, I think is that like when I see it now, on the one hand, like I have compassion because I went through it in my own version. I definitely see something that's starting to happen where it becomes just more of this, like my whole rant I did a few years back about pop spirituality, you know, like
which I really love that. Whatever you wrote about it, I was just like slow clapping at home, like, yes, please, more.
How to trigger as many people as possible really fast.
Totally. Right. It's like talking about hunting in a vegan form or something. It's like, people are gonna get pissed. Yeah. But
just throwing myself into the Shark Tank, which I also found was really interesting when you have all of these like spiritual people getting like extremely violently angry.
Who are just like, totally. You're like, all right, guys. Like
all one, except for you, because you're talking shit about something that I believe.
Right.
You know, and I get that, like, because I'm sure if I saw that, you know, when I was 20, I'd be like, well, we're all part of the same thing, so why are you hating on everyone? And it's part of the awakening, and like, I get those perspectives. I do think with some of the name changing, it's like, oh, okay, well, to become a business coach, I have to look like this person. And so, these people change their name. So I have to like, I need a name like that so that people remember me, you know, and I don't think that's everyone. I think that, you know, it's a personal process for each person. But I get wafts of that sometimes, different people, which is very interesting with social media.
Yeah.
Because we literally create like, and I don't think that this is a bad thing as long as you're present with it and it's functional with your awareness and you're not feeding into the image that you're creating. But we need an image to some extent if you're going to make social media part of your business on a certain level, just like you need a professional image if you work in like a big corporation.
You do need a public persona of some kind, right? It's like, so that's, I get that. Yeah. So keep going.
But it's tricky though when
it's very tricky.
That gets mixed in with spirituality specifically, I think.
For sure.
You know, because then you have paradigms of entire ways of life that you think that you're supposed to be living, and you don't necessarily know where a lot of those beliefs are coming from, which is also interesting to me. Yeah. Like there's all these unconscious things that people like we take on, like we think we have to be.
Right.
And I think also that can happen in any character structure too. Mm-hmm. That more goes with like if you look at meme waves, like on large levels of groups of people, things that they believe. But you know, I think what's the most scary to me about this kind of thing is when that cutting off happens, where people feel like I have to cut off. And I didn't do this consciously. Like when I say, I'm into punk rock, and like those parts of me are like they can be fucking grounded, they can get shit done, like they're parts of my force that I didn't have contact with, that I haven't integrated more, because it's not just the music, it's the thing that resonates with that, it's the thing that can like handle grit and incarnation and like, you know, that also actually makes me really good at healing. But I think when people cut off those parts of themselves that have, you know, connection to anger, connection to rage, connection to violence, connection to darkness, like connection to intense parts of their sexuality, like all of these things, if you just chop those parts off and go, I'm going to be rainbow unicorn butterfly. Yeah. It's like this whole part of your humanity and being still exists. But I think that's the most dangerous thing that I see in the New Age scene, is when people that are it's so interesting too, because sometimes they can speak and they can be like, oh, I'm very light and everything's beautiful. And like behind their voice, I hear like, fuck you, I want to kill you.
Totally.
You know, like there's this like insane rage where like, I want to shake them, you know? And I think that that's the dangerous thing. I think everything else can be dangerous to a point just because you disconnect from parts of yourself and then put all this pressure to have to be something public.
Yep.
But that's the thing that I worry about the most is like, we are the full spectrum. We're the animals, we're the angels, we're the, you know, all of it. And if you take one out, I don't know.
Yeah.
I know there are spiritual beliefs that say, you know, ignore your desires and cut off from all bad things. But I haven't really personally met people totally integrated that have taken on those paths of denial. And I've met some really solid people who have accepted and embraced all, like the dark, the light, the quote unquote good, the quote unquote bad. Like I feel like there's beauty in our humanity in all of the different aspects, you know? And so it is interesting how self-identification we can cut off from these parts.
You know, it's an interesting conversation to have with people, because I think that's why I asked you. I was just curious, like, you know, you're plugged into it. I think your demographic of people that you're probably working with are probably different than mine. And so, but we're connected in what we would call, you know, things that are outside the box. And so I do like to ask people. I do really want to like probe into this because, you know, I've had the gamut. I have like people, some of the people I hold in the highest regard, truly, who I could just go to the deepest, darkest, and the brightest places, have a spiritualized name that was maybe given to them by a tradition, or they've maybe chosen it or shifted it or whatever, that I'm like, you know, that person would take a bullet for me, and vice versa. Like, you're just like, I put you in the highest, and it's clean, right? Like that it's totally clean. And then I've just seen the opposite, where it's just, it's just really, it's like such, it's so life, right? Life is like this. The gamut exists, right? I've seen it be represented in a very clean way, and then I've seen it represented in a very dirty, kind of slimy way, and everything in between. And in the end, it's like, you know, we're all just trying to get through life, doing our thing, trying to figure out how we can, you know, process our stuff. How does this work? Yeah. No one knows what the hell. And I feel like if anyone tells you they know what they're doing, I'm like, no, you don't. Like, you're guessing just like the rest of us. Like, no one really knows fully. But I've seen it, right? And I've seen that mixture. But I mean, I have, you know, where I'm like, sometimes it's made me backpedal. You know, I'll see the spiritualized name, and I'm like, ooh, and it doesn't mean that it's bad, right? I might talk to them and immediately be like, it's clean, it's fine, it's totally good. Yeah. But it's like made me do that a number of times, where I'm like, okay, now I have to kind of just go down my checklist, you know?
Yeah. Well, I find, and this is what's beautiful, like, the fact that you've studied so deeply in the tradition that you have. Yeah. And my school has been the first time I've been connected to a real tradition, not just like not just esoteric books, not just like some new age version of traditional teachings. But, you know, it's interesting to me that you say like, and maybe I'm misinterpreting what you said, but it sounded to me like when you have friends that have gotten their names from a tradition, like something feels more solid, and I don't think that that's one for one or black or white.
Sure.
But there is something that just was so markedly different in my experience of the energy behind a living tradition. Yeah. And what that holds, and what that holds you to when you come into contact with the integrity there, versus like, I'm just, or what, I don't know, maybe this is bad. Like, I'm just a dit. Like, I don't know how to explain. Like, I think fluff is a really good word. Yeah. Something that doesn't totally have a backbone or a skeleton to it, or a structural definition somewhere.
Well, and I always like the idea of shallow roots, right? It's like, shallow roots. It's a young plant or a young tree, right? It's shallow. It doesn't mean, and shallow, not like superficial bad. It just means the roots aren't deep, you know, like that, like something. I think traditions have deep roots. They're like, quite literally, the tree has been growing a long time. Maybe it's a redwood that's thousands of years old that is interconnected, and redwoods grow horizontally and connect to other trees, but they have deep root systems. And I think what happens is that, it's a weird double-edged sword, because I've come into contact with like old traditions more in the martial arts community, and I came across lineage systems that are like, here's the lineage, you can track it back, you can do this thing. And for me, this go round, I was like, it's just too dogmatic. I just can't do it. I'm going to have to train with people who have trained traditionally and who also are kind of pulling away from that a little bit, that are just, it's a little more, it's less confined, So, and it's like, and that's the thing. I've seen the power of tradition, right? And we can find these really deep lineage systems, and it really is powerful. And then you have to just kind of come to this place and like, is that my move?
Yeah.
This go
on?
Like, do I want to do that? Do I want to do that? Or maybe have I done that before and just, it's familiar. So it feels, like, hey, we should do this again. I think there's definitely like a thread of that too, where I've been like, I don't know if past lives, concurrent lives, whatever simulation reality we're in, however this thing works, that's an idea that I've just wrestled with, and I've kind of come to grips with, where I'm like, I don't think I'm supposed to do that this time as gray. If there is multiple times, I'm like, I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm just going to go with this thing. But I think, again, it's just funny. We have to navigate these things. I think if we're pursuing this kind of stuff, it's a very, it's a very bumpy kind of terrain. And I really liked what you said, right? When you were talking about cutting off the rough edges, right? Like cutting these things off and just being the moonbeam unicorn, right? Like I mean, personally, like from an art perspective, I like jagged edges. I like like in a sculpture. I mean, I love polished, but I love the dichotomy of like rough edges that can hurt you. Like, ooh, that's really cool. And I always kind of use art as a metaphor, because I think life and art are so closely related and they do mimic each other. I remember when I was drawing, I had to do a lot of still lifes, right? A lot of nudes, because I was like a traditional, like I was going, not graphic design, which I love, but I was like, I want to move a pencil and like draw stuff, and I want to sculpt and just be that kind of artist. And I remember we had to do a lot of nudes. So we got a lot of, when you're early 20s, guys, there'd be beautiful women that would come in, you have a sketch, and you're like, oh, this is rough. Like, this is great. Like, for a guy, I was like, I get to draw a beautiful woman by traditional standards, right? Like a beautiful woman. And then I remember there was there was a really heavy set black woman that came in, and I immediately, and she just like took off her clothes and she was all smiles. And I remember thinking like, wow, like here's this person who like by the cultural standards wouldn't be like quote unquote attractive. And she made the best artwork. Like her face, when I would draw her face looked so much better than all these other women that I had drawn. And I was like, in her curves, her shapes, it was like, she makes better art. And I remember just being like, I would have never I would have never made the connection if I hadn't drawn her. Like there was this thing, and I think it just points to this larger picture though, right? Like chopping off the rough edges, the things that we maybe like don't feel good about or that we don't like, it's not as fun. Like I feel like it's not as dynamic and it's not as real. I'm like, everyone, I don't care who you are, has got really rough edges somewhere. And the more you pretend to hide them is like, who are you fooling? Like, you know, is it you?
And why are you a human?
Yeah, like, right. It's like
the whole thing, like,
right.
And what's really interesting about that to me is seeing, and I've started to see more and more of this, is how the New Age scene is just a microcosm for the thing that's happening more collectively with humanity, where it's like, you have to be like this.
Yeah.
This is how you be a proper human.
Yeah.
Which everything that says that so does not speak to the truth of this full spectrum that we are. Like, we are messy and we're beautiful and we're profound and we're intense and we're dark and we're deep and we're so much more than these just different, like, catacombed or like subsectioned off, primmed, proper parts of ourselves. And that whole thing is what causes all the suffering. Like the fact that we feel like we need to be something else than what we innately are, so much so that we have lost contact with who we are, that we need to go to other people to reconnect to it. You know what I mean?
When it's
like
a
that's how far
very,
we've gotten.
yeah, I agree. And it's an unrealistic expectation, right? Because there's just this simple truth of people are rough. They're rough edged, right? Like they're jagged, imperfect. And, yeah, the more we can kind of celebrate that, I feel like the better, right? And the larger, it is healthier. I feel like fundamentally,
Beautiful.
yeah, it's way.
Sorry, I don't know if I can. Sorry.
No, not at all.
But it's so beautiful.
I agree completely. Yeah,
And it is like what you're saying too. It's like, yes, the chiseled version of this ultimate blueprint has beauty, but like the way that alchemy works is not like, let's just fast forward to gold now.
right,
You know, like there would be no
right,
science of alchemy if we all just fast forwarded to gold, and the whole art form and science and complexity behind it would be completely lost. And what comes through that process, all of the ancient secrets, all
yeah,
of the secrets that get you to that place, all of those aha moments that
yep,
when you come into contact with the source of your essence or something essential where everything pops and you're like, oh, I see, like I get it. These noetic kind of
right,
clicks that you have.
yes,
And that comes through in with the mess,
yeah,
you know, or with the thing that like
fully,
is improper or flawed, you know, and it's just such a black white perspective when it misses the point of beauty and even like, not that it all has to be beautiful, it's just learning to see it from a different
yeah,
lens.
absolutely,
And I think that when you see that in other people, like when you see that in your patients,
yeah,
when you see that in your partner, when you see that in your loved ones, like, I don't know, man, something happens in those spaces or
oh
things start
yeah,
to change
I agree,
drastically faster.
I agree completely, and you know Kai, right?
I love Kai.
I live with Kai all through acupuncture school. He's like one of my best buddies, and
Really?
oh yeah, Kai and I are like very close, and he's one of my groomsmen. Like Kai's like, yeah, he's like one of my closest like amigos, and Kai and
You
I,
love me, Kai?
yeah, big shout out Kai. He'll be on here soon, so I'm gonna get him on. But when I was talking to him when we were living together in acupuncture school, we were together we lived together for like 3 years at this really pivotal time in our lives and in the study of this medicine, and there was so much bonding because we were doing the same thing, and we got into this conversation where we both, I think when you're studying this kind of thing like Chinese medicine, there was this, what's the word I want to use, there's an idea that you're like this Taoist monk who's coming in to learn the spiritual ways of the Jedi arts, and you're like, there's kind of an expectation sometimes, I think, when you come into that kind of stuff where it's like almost like the people in the school are like, who's trying to be overly spiritual, and is everyone spiritualized here, and do I have to fit into this mold? There's kind of a weird thing that happens, and Kai and I both talked about it, and neither one of us are like heavy drinkers at all. Like substances is not an issue for me in my life. Kai, it's never been either. But we both, when we were like about to live with each other, like, so do you drink? Do you like the occasional like, beer? Like, do you like?
Do you drink beer?
Yeah, like it was like it was just this, because I was like, because if you don't, bro, it's probably gonna be a problem. And he laughed. He's like, oh, thank God. He's like, no. And I was like, have you ever? We got into this really funny conversation. I was like, have you ever given up like alcohol? Just like totally said you were gonna like not do that, or cannabis or whatever. And he was like, yeah, I've gone through that. And I was like, and what did you take? Like, what did you learn from it? Because I have too. And he's like, I like a little bit of that, He's like, I like a little bit of I like to drink a little bit of whiskey. I like to get a little rough with my buddies, my boys. And I was like, me too. It's just this fundamental thing that this thing is quote unquote bad, right? Mm-hmm. And anything can be taken to excess. But we got into this place where we're like for us, it was like to be a little rough that way was considerably more fun and enjoyable, because it was an acknowledgement of just like, I like it. It's a rough edge thing that I like. And, and when we got to that, it really helped us kind of process that piece of us, because I was like, yeah, I want to be the Chinese medicine guy who likes to drink whiskey on the camping trips with his buddies. Like I was like, if for me to deny that, I would be so full of shit. I would be so full of shit to be like, that I'm not going to tie one off with my buddies here and there, in this.
Totally.
And it was a good realization to kind of get to that place where I'm like, yeah, we've tried that and it's just not the move, for at least for us. We're like, we want a little bit of the rough edge. And I really feel like that's, it's just so pivotal to like these larger healing processes in general. Because one of the first things you said in this podcast was the talking about shame, right? When you said that, it's like, man, shame can wipe you out. Like,
dude, it's intense. It's really intense. It has its own agenda with so much will behind it.
Yeah.
That's what surprises me. Like the level of our will that is fueled towards and engaged in and invested in hiding. And then the whole, it's like the agenda. I've been calling it, that sounds really intense and conspiracy theory like, but like right. Shame totally has its own agenda.
Yeah.
And it will warp your whole world and cut you off from parts of yourself. And it's so disproportionate, like you're saying.
Right.
Like, I like to drink beers sometimes.
Yeah.
Someone could take that and be like, I'm such a horrible person and
Fully.
I can't tell anyone. And then I'm going to go do it by myself. There's so many things that can domino effect. And they can just build and amplify into this thing that's way more unhealthy than like, go drink a beer with your friend.
Like
so, yeah.
100%, because I've heard those arguments, they're like, and from spiritual traditions, if you have the second you drink alcohol, your vibration is lowered, and I'm like, that might be true. Like, I'm like, I'm not here to say that that's not true. It could be true, but I like lowering my vibration sometimes. I think like that's like, I'm okay with totally. That. Like, I'm okay to, totally. I don't need to be at, 102 frequency number. I'm like, I don't mind going down to 70 sometimes or 50. Like, it's fully okay with me to like get that and accept that I want to drop it. I'm like, yeah, I do want to slow it down. I want to go get in the mud and I want to be dirty for a little while and then I'll come back up. That's fine. Like that's a good place. It's a good place to be. Well, have you heard of this? So they talk about this in Chinese medicine, but it's probably other traditions as well. But the emotions that we experience, that we go through, one of the kind of fundamental approaches, right? Like the way you can look at emotions in the body is they say, treat them like a personality, like a living personality. So when you interface with shame or anger or joy or, bliss or grief or whatever the thing is, they always say you have to understand that it's a personality of sorts. And so if you approach it that way, you have reverence for it. And you're like, okay, is this a personality I want to hang out with? So if shame were a personality, you have to realize that if you spend enough time with it, like that personality will rub off on you. And I remember thinking like, wow, it's not a separate thing from us that like comes in and out of us. It's like, it's a personality. And when for whatever reason, when I thought of it like that, I thought, boy, you've got to be mindful of who you're hanging out with then,
Yeah, without a doubt.
You got to be careful. Like, do I want to hang out with Mr. Grief forever? Do I want to hang out with Mrs. Shame forever? And I think when I thought of it like that, I kind of saw them as like social peers, my emotions. And it was like, okay, I'm gonna have to hang out with them, right? We have to hang out with toxic people sometimes. We have to, like, that's how we learn. But I don't want to spend all my time with that person, that quote unquote.
I love that.
Yeah.
I don't word it like that, but I do a lot of the work that I do with my clients and with myself and with my friend, like with everything.
Your clan.
Is really learning how to objectify emotions so just seeing like how much of my identity am I basing off an emotion I'm having. First of all, can I see that? Like you're saying, like, because you have to be able to see it.
Right.
And then getting to that level of like, okay, well, this is something that is being experienced through me, but it's not necessarily me. And that process of separation or of objectification is very, very similar to what you're talking about. And it's so crucial and it's so key. And I think that what's beautiful about that is this is one of my biggest irks about the healing path is that like people, and I've fallen into it too, like using your process as a way to stay stuck in your process.
Yeah.
So using like, but like I'm feeling this and it's coming from this thing that happened with my mom when I was younger and then you just keep piling on reasons why you need to keep feeling out of whack or out of alignment with yourself, which just amplifies the same thing instead of recognizing and starting to objectify it more.
Yeah.
You know, and the power of just seeing, like, okay, this is here, this is happening.
Yep.
I'm not going to fight and I think here's the tricky part, and here's part of the mastery and why it's an art, is I'm not going to fight my way out of this. Because that's the first thing that oftentimes will just amplify it. It's like, oh no, I'm feeling shame.
Say that again, because you froze for like a second. So say that again.
Okay.
Just backtrack that sentence and say that sentence again. Did you say you not fight, or was it?
Yeah, I'm not going to fight my way out of this emotion. So whatever the emotion is.
Okay.
I'm not going to, because my experience has been, and seeing other people in it too, for like 10 years now, is whenever you start to see an emotional state and think, oh, this is bad, this is wrong, this is cutting me off, I need to scramble my way out of it, you're just going to amplify it, because you're basically creating fear about the thing you're experiencing. Right. And then you're defaulting into something that's saying, I need to get away, which is just going to amplify the thing that you're trying to run away from, instead of just more objectively seeing, like, okay, I'm feeling this thing. Yeah. What am I noticing about the quality? Like, what are the qualities of my energy feel like right now? Do I feel heavy? Do I feel light? Do I feel inspired? You know, you start to get this more clear perspective of it. And then, like, there's practices that you can do to state change, to get out of it, but more from an empowered and integrated place.
Right.
And less from a space of like, this thing is wrong and I need to kick it out of my life. Or like alienate myself from this emotion. And I think it's really powerful, because that's how you develop emotional intelligence, is doing the things that you're talking about too. Right. Like, because at a certain level, you do get to a place where you have choice. You do get to a place where you can practice seeing, I'm in a certain state, I want to practice being in another state. But the pitfall there is my experience is, the pitfall is if you're naming, like putting a name tag on that state as being bad, wrong, XYZ, and you're identifying with it in a certain way because you shouldn't be feeling it.
Right. The shouldn't. Oh, the big shouldn't word.
Yeah.
It's difficult. I mean, it's difficult terrain for people to navigate, because I think people, right, the Western culture, we live very much in our thinking minds. We're always thinking and processing, and we're up here. And then there's this bridge of, people don't feel enough sometimes, and sometimes they feel too much. There's you can get kind of hung up, I think, in all the centers. There's, the Chinese has the three dantians, your lower center, which is like kinesthetic, your gravitational center, move your body, physically move it.
Yeah.
Feel and think, right? So it's like move, feel, think, and we have to jump between these, and we need all of them. We have to we have to kind of shift those lenses depending on what we're doing. And just as I think as a way of self-preservation, we can get stuck anywhere, no matter how awesome or altruistic stuff is. Like you said, right? It just becomes a story, and it's like, you've got to move out of that at some point. You have to shift gears and kind of, roll forward with life and just put one foot in front of the other. When my dad died when I was 19, I considered, he died in April, and I took the summer off because we had summer break. And I remember I talked to my mom, and I was like, Mom, I think I should take a semester off. And she's like, I've watched you this whole summer, and you've been pretty present with it and processing it and going through it. I hadn't cried yet, but I was still just being with it. And she's like, I think you should go back to school. And I was like, why? She's like, Gray, because if you stop now, you probably will not go back. She's like, just keep the momentum going. Sometimes with life, she's like, keep the ball rolling. Even if, she's like, I don't care if your grades tank, just keep going. Like, just keep the momentum. And it was one of the best things she could have said to me, because she was right. I remember I went back and I thought, it's good that I'm just moving forward and not overthinking this. I'm just kind of staying. Yeah. And it was also good to hear that she's like, if your grades tank, it's fine. She was like, I just want you to keep moving. Don't just stop. And I thought that was good advice. And she was right. And it worked out. It all kind of like evolved and went down that way. Well, Iskah, let me ask you this, because we have to kind of wrap time here. But in the vein of what we've some of the threads we've talked about, where we're saying making these things, health, healing, people's processing their life, making it accessible and digestible for the people listening. If you were to say to people who have never thought about this stuff, they haven't thought about their subconscious programming, the things they've gone through, the past experiences, who are not maybe natural feelers, right? Feeling into their lives. What do you think what would be like one of the most accessible, down to earth things that you could tell people to do, or like what would be one of the accessible things that people, if they want to start moving through their life and processing some of their what's under the hood, as you said, what's one of the like basic accessible ways that people can do that to get this collective process in motion if they want to go down this road?
Oh, that's such a good question. Well, I mean, and it sounds so cliche.
I think the question was so heavy that it actually froze as I asked the question. Oh, that's hilarious. So people listening, I asked that question and it made Skype stop. So we'll wait for Iskah to come back here. But it is a good question, because I think probably there's a bunch of you listening to this and wondering, so are you back, Iskah? Okay. I was just covering airtime, and I said the question was so heavy. The question was so heavy that it actually stopped Skype. Oh, which is hilarious. So okay, so go ahead and start over. So
I was hearing you say that.
Yeah. So go ahead and start your answer again, because pretty much as soon as you closed your eyes, it was like everything froze and just brought back. So that's hilarious. Okay, so
Keep my eyes open.
Yeah. Don't go too deep. You're gonna make Skype crash. Yeah. So yeah, just restart your answer back to the digestible, accessible thing that people can do. Yeah, basically for the layperson, right? The lay Western person, like what can they do to start this larger mechanism?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and like what I was saying was, it might sound cliche, but learn to get to know yourself as you are. Like, become curious about the fact that maybe you don't know, like maybe things about you are right in front of you and you've never just experienced them directly from just being with yourself. Start to recognize how many ways you think you should be, or you need to be, whatever it is, for other people's validation, acceptance. What are you afraid of people seeing about you? What does no one know about you that you know, or that you've even hidden so deep that you barely remember about yourself? How can you become curious about who you are? And then can you do that in a way where that curiosity is from a place of innocence? That curiosity is from a place of just wanting to discover without having to fix anything, without having to change anything. And from there, I think there's so much richness that you can find about the nature of your being, like just the general curiosity of who you are, how you operate, beyond what you identify with, I think can be really big. Yeah. And asking little, big questions, but they're quite simple. Like,
oh, we lost you again. The big questions. Oh, there we go. You're back. Yeah. As soon as you said big questions. Yeah, you're here. I mean, I can hear you. Your screen is frozen, but I can still hear you. As soon as you said, yeah, ask yourself the big questions, and then that made Skype crash again. But there we go. You're back. Okay, yeah. As soon as you said the big, you're like the big questions. Skype froze again. So yeah, what were some of those? What were some of those big questions that you were saying that people might want to consider?
like what do I identify with versus like what do I not know about myself?
Yeah.
You know, what do I again like not know about myself?
Yeah. And that I love,
Unique, not at an identity level.
right. And I like what you said
Did
about
I freeze again?
it just for a second. Yeah.
I think I froze again.
Yeah, you did for a second, but it's okay. This is just the way Skype goes sometimes. But I liked the curiosity piece you said. That's a great place.
Yeah.
That's a
Be
great
curious.
thread.
How about that? Be curious.
Be
about
curious.
yourself.
Yeah, be curious about yourself, because I think that's a really good way to think about it too, and that's lighthearted, which I think is important when you go down this road, because people get so damn heavy about their process, and they're so guilty and shameful about their process. And I think that's a good one. Be curious. That's a really great thread to consider. Yeah. Well, it looks like we're gonna have to end this, because Skype's like stop this conversation. This is just the way it is. I don't know, but yeah, this is the way it goes sometimes with Skype, unfortunately. But can you still hear me? Can you still hear me talking? Hopefully, maybe not. Well, let's see, Iskah. I may have lost you fully, but in any case, are you still there? Okay, yeah. I think this is like this is the Skype gods being like, it's time to stop. So
you guys are talking.
I know, totally. But Iskah, I really appreciate your time and just all of your insights, and you being willing to share kind of your evolutionary process. You know, it's good for people to hear, because I think we all have to process our stuff in life, and I think it's difficult for a lot of people, and I think people are not alone in that process. So it's really good to hear your take on it. And Iskah, if people, do you have a social media or anything, or website you wanna pitch real quick? Where can people find you on social media, and if they want to get into contact with you and learn more about what you're doing?
Yeah, so social media is the best. My Facebook is Iskah, Iskah, Benstock, Benstock.
Okay.
My Instagram account is truth.aligned.life. So you can follow me on Instagram, and I do stories and things like that. And I would say follow me on those two platforms. I'm also launching a group course that's like a year-long journey for women called The Sanctuary. So for women that are interested in their spiritual growth, development, but like actually really interested in cultivating something over a year-long period. And we're going to cover all sorts of practices, breath work, sensuality, sexuality, self-development, like so many different levels of spiritual transformational growth in a really grounded, applicable way. So I'll be starting that as well, and you can find out about that on my Facebook too. I haven't bought the domain name yet for the landing page, to be honest, but maybe by the time you have this podcast up,
you'll probably have it. Very cool, Iskah. Well, thank you again for your time and for everything that you shared. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been so much fun to jam with you.
Yeah, definitely. We'll do it again sometime.
Let's please.
All right. Thanks a bunch, Iskah.
Bye, everyone. Mwah.